Several years ago, a very high-powered delegation of businessmen from the United States came to Israel for a tour. They visited all of the major tourist spots, the Kotel, Yad Vashem. They met with the Prime Minister and the President at the Knesset. But they also made a stop at the Mira Yeshiva in the Beit Yisrael suburb just next to Mea Sharim. They were taken on a tour of the famous Mira Yeshiva, one of the biggest yeshivot in the world with thousands of students. And then they were taken to meet the legendary Rosh Yeshiva, Rav Nosson Tzvi Finkel. Rabbi Finkel was actually an American who, just at the end of his teens, went to study in Israel and eventually became the head of the yeshiva. Rabbi Finkel was an incredible person. He suffered for most of his life from Parkinson's disease. He could barely walk, he could barely talk, and yet he made time for this group of Americans. It was somewhat of a clash of cultures, because although everybody was Jewish, here you had the Rosh Yeshiva in his black rabbinic garb, living in Jerusalem, and these businessmen who were highly assimilated. What was the Rosh Yeshiva going to tell them? What message could he put to these people that would make an impact upon them? And he told them the following story. When Jews were brought into the concentration camps, into Auschwitz, they were given very little clothing. The conditions were terrible. It was freezing, the Polish winter, and occasionally they were given a blanket. But this was a threadbare blanket, hardly providing any warmth whatsoever. And of course, people would jump and stretch and scream and try to grab the blanket. Now, there were two types of people who got blankets. There were those who held onto the blanket. They went to their bunks and they wrapped themselves up in their blankets. And there were others who shared the blanket. They went in the bunk, there were a whole lot of other people in the bunk, and they tried to spread this thin, threadbare blanket over everybody. There was a particularly cold night, and in the morning, when people came into the barracks, they found a number of people had passed away in the evening. All of those people who had held onto the blankets for themselves had perished. But those who had taken the blankets and spread it over their fellow inmates in the barracks, in fact, had survived the night. Why? Because of the intense warmth that was generated by so many people together under that blanket. This was the story that Rabbi Finkel told. And he concluded as follows. He said, God has blessed all of you with very, very big blankets. Are you going to keep those blankets for yourselves, or are you going to share it with other people? This particular message had such an impact on one of the visitors. This was the CEO of Starbucks Coffee, who had come to visit in Jerusalem. In fact, he couldn't sleep that night. The next morning he went back to the yeshiva, and naturally he gave them quite a large donation. But the meaning of the story is very relevant to the parasha this week. At the end of the parasha, we are taught about ma'aser. Ma'aser is a tenth of the crop, the olive oil, the wine, that was given to the tribe of Levi. The tribe of Levi did not have any agricultural land for themselves. So they were provided for from the people. They would give them 10% of their crops. But then the Torah says that Levi who received 10% had to then take 10% of that and give it onto a Kohen. Essentially what that means is that a person who is living off charity also has to give charity. Even if you are given, as it were, your threadbare blanket, you have to share it with others. And by sharing it with others, one is blessed in turn. And that's indeed what it says in the Code of Jewish Law. It doesn't say this about any other mitzvah, but in the introduction to the laws of charity, it says whoever gives charity will not suffer any harm from giving charity. On the contrary, they are blessed. Moreover, it says in the Torah, ma'aser ta'aser, that when you give ma'aser, it says ta'aser, aser ta'aser, you shall surely give a tithe, which is repetitive. What does that mean, aser ta'aser? So to play on words, the sages say, aser ta'asher. If you give a tithe, you shall become rich, you shall become worthy, you shall be blessed by Hashem. And this is the story of the blanket. Hashem has blessed us all with different size and texture blankets. How are we going to use those? Are we going to just wrap ourselves, or are we going to spread the blankets over other people? I wish you a Shabbat Shalom.